Hey! So I figured I'd jump on and kind of do some makeup tutorials since we're all sitting at home doing nothing in this lovely quarantine. I figured we'd start out with more of like a basic look. I do want to continue this into a different video where we talk about like wing liner. So I figured I'd kind of lay down my base of eyeshadow before we go forward with that. I already have like my foundation and everything on, so we're just going to jump straight into eyes. I think before we do anything else, I want to go over some basics with brushes. So if you are sitting down watching this, trying to follow along, you kind of know what kind of products you'll need in advance. Kind of like a ingredient list for when you're trying to bake or cook something, right? So when you're looking at brushes, it's really hard when you have tons of brushes to choose from, right? So to kind of break it down, there's no right or wrong brush for you to use when you're doing pretty much anything. You know, you could take a cheek brush and try and use it on your eyes, wouldn't make a big deal, right? So I think the best practice when you're looking at something and what to choose is to go ahead and pick something that, you know, is comfortable for you and what works for you. The basics of what I like to use, you know, when you're talking about eyeshadow brushes, it's hard to pick, right? So, you know, if you're looking at your basic brushes here, these are some of brushes that I like to use for blending. Size makes a big difference in the sense of how much space it's going to cover when you're going ahead using it. So, I mean, you can clearly see here, there's some that are bigger than others. This one's a little bit more flat. You know, this one's big and fluffy. They're all going to do slightly different things. The bigger the brush and the fluffier the brush, the softer your shadow is going to go on. The more dense, even though this is fluffy, it is denser than this guy, you're going to get more color payoff from something like this versus this guy, right? So then, okay, cool, we got our blending down. What about packing on bright colors and stuff on the lid? That's kind of where your flatter brushes come into play. So if you want something that's more of a bold color or glitter, something flat like this is going to be your best, in your best interest to use. Now, there's been plenty of times where I've used a fluffy brush to apply my lid colors. It doesn't really make a big difference, so kind of depends on the look you're trying to go for and what works best for you. I do like some smaller detail brushes as well, like these guys here. This can be really good for trying to blend underneath the eye if you want just like a soft shadow effect. Promise you my brushes are clean, they're just stained. But something like this guy is really good for smudging if you want like a really good smoky look and you're trying to blend out some eyeshadow. So everything is just kind of like your personal preference, what you feel works best. Sometimes, especially if I'm in a rush, I'll use like one brush for my whole entire eye. But just kind of, you know, when you're doing smaller details, you want a very specific look, having brush options makes a huge difference. And then going into more of like other products that we'll need, I always suggest an eyeshadow primer. Now, again, everything that I'm going to suggest using is all a personal preference. There's no you should use this product over this one or vice versa, because it's really just what works for you. Sometimes I prefer cream, sometimes I prefer powder or liquid, etc. is all what works best for you. So I have my MAC eyeshadow primer here, so I'm going to go ahead and put that on. And then this technique that we're going to use, you know, will work with any eyeshadow colors you're going to use. It's more of just, you know, blending and placement. For this tutorial, I suppose, we're just going to use very neutral colors just to give you something basic, because again, I do want to use this for another video, just kind of lay down our base. So I'm just going to go ahead and apply this. Just for those who are wondering, this is a 24-hour eye base for MAC Cosmetics. Personally, this is my favorite eyeshadow primer because I need very little and it goes a long way. I just take a teeny little bit and rub this on my eye. Sometimes really, this would have been more than enough to use on both eyes. But sometimes, you know, I even take a little bit too much and I'm able to use both. And you see this come up like it's the teeniest amount that I need. And I just swipe that with the top of my finger and then go ahead and apply. Now, the reason why an eyeshadow primer is so important is because it holds on to anything that you put on top. So think of like when you are painting a wall. You necessarily need a primer. No, but it may not look the best, right? It's the same idea when you're thinking about like your eyeshadow or anything with makeup. Prepping beforehand is going to make whatever you put on top and your result so much, like, just so much nicer. You know, can you get away with not using a primer? Absolutely. Does it make a huge difference? In my opinion, yes, because it gives you that base to really hold on to your shadow. You know, you don't want to leave the house and in 10 minutes to an hour you got your eyeliner running down your face, or, you know, those beautiful colors you applied, whether they be like a purple or neutral, whatever, anything in between. You want them to look as pigmented, you know, 3 hours into the day is when, you know, the first 3 minutes and you applied it. So kind of going from there, you know, our next step would be eyeshadow. So I have a couple options here. I have the MAC Semi Sweet palette. I have a couple single shadows as well. I kind of just pulled out whatever I keep normally in my everyday makeup. You know, take a palette of your preference, whether it be of color, of neutrals, glitter, whatever it may be, and follow along. So we already have our primer on. My next step is to then, obviously apply my shadow. I'm going to take a fluffier brush. I'm going with this guy because it will cover more space when I'm going ahead to apply. So a trick that I like to use when I am blending is you can absolutely just go ahead and like blend right on top of your primer, right? But if you're new to blending out your eyeshadow, or, you know, maybe there's been plenty of times where like I've applied too much and my eyeshadow is too, my eyeshadow primer, I'm sorry, is too tacky. It sometimes like takes too much, and then you're like, oh my god, I have this like one eye that's like super vibrant and the other one that's not, you know. It kind of helps to prevent error going further. It's not something you need to do every time, especially if I want something more vibrant. I usually just go right on top of my primer. But to kind of keep that little safety net, I like to go in with an eyeshadow it's a little deeper or the same color of your skin tone. So for me, it would be either of these two up here. So clearly I use this guy a lot. So I take two little dabs of that. I always like to shake off any excess on my brush because you don't want it flicking all over the place. And then, you know, kind of go ahead and dust that across my entire eye. So what this does is it just mattifies the primer, because if you go ahead and touch it on your eye after it's sat there for a second, you kind of feel that it's tacky, right? So it's going to stick like glue. So anything you put on top of that is going to grab. So again, if you're a little heavier handed, you know, you're new to blending, that's going to be like a super easy fix if you find that like you get like really patchy in between. So we're just going to go ahead and do that same thing to the other side and just make sure that we're fully blended out. So the next step is to create shape in the eye. So with that, you're basically creating shadows in your eye shape. So if you have a more prominent brow bone, right, you're going to want to use less shadow up here or lighter shadows up top because you already have that natural shadow. If you're somebody who doesn't have a prominent brow bone, you're going to want to use a little bit of a heavier hand, maybe a denser brush or darker shadow, or build a little bit more to create that dimension in the eye area. For me, I have a hooded eye shape, which basically means that my brow bone, it's there, but like when I close my eyes, you can see how it folds over. So a lot of the times what I will do is spend all this time creating this beautiful eyeshadow look, and then halfway through, you know, I rest my eyes and I'm like, oh, you can't see any of the work I did. So typically to find your brow bone, if you're not sure where to even go for that, right, if you kind of feel around, you can feel where your finger starts to divot in just a little bit. So, you know, you can either go directly on that brow bone. For me, where I have a hooded eye shape, I like to go just a little bit above, because it helps to, you know, for you to be able to see all the work that I did on my eyes when my eyes are at a resting position. I'm not trying to walk around all day like this or like this to keep, you know, everybody viewing my eyeshadow, right? You want to just have somebody look at you and be like, oh my god, your makeup looks so pretty. So I'm going to go in with a shade that's a little deeper than my skin tone. So I'm going to go ahead in with this guy here. That one is Bamboo in the Semi Sweet. It doesn't matter what eyeshadow you use. You can go in with the bright purple if you want to. Personal preference, just for the sake of the look that we're going for here and just something neutral and light, I'm going to keep with that guy. So the same brush, I'm just taking, you know, two little taps, and we're going to go a little above that brow bone. So I'm going to start on the outside and work my way in windshield wiper motions. So the reason why you always want to start on the outside and work your way in, I don't want to say always, but depending on the look that you're doing, typically an everyday look, your placement matters. So if you start in the middle of your eye or the inner side of your eye, that's where you're going to disperse the most amount of product, because where you're touching it is where it's going to stay. So if I start on the outside, I'm going to get the deepest pocket of color out here versus in here. Now, why is that a bad thing? Because remember, when you're placing your eyeshadow, you're creating a shape. So if I put that dark color in here, right, this is going to automatically look darker, and all of a sudden now I'm going to look like I haven't slept because I have dark circles on the inside of my eye. Typically, depending on the shape of your face, you know, we all kind of have this shadow, like right in here, you can see depending, like, obviously I have my light hitting me on this side, so you don't see it, but when I turn, you know, here, you see that shadow come through, right? We don't need to add to that because it just looks like we're tired and we haven't slept. If we stay on the outside and work our way in, that's creating all the depth and deepness out here and creating this in here really bright and open, so then we look more awake. So I'm just going to keep kind of blending that out. Now, with the color I chose, you're not going to see, you know, a huge difference between this eye and like my other eye, because it just kind of, you know, you see a little bit of that shadow in there, but not a whole lot. But that's kind of the point, because we're creating shape and dimension. I'm just going to go through and do the same thing on this eye here as well. And remember, working on the outside in. Now, if you are somebody that is more heavy-handed, where you hold your brush matters. For me, I'm kind of somewhere in between, where I'm neither like super light with my brush, but I'm also not heavy-handed either. So I typically hold mine in the middle, because that to me is a really good resting spot for when I'm blending. The higher up you hold your brush here, the denser it's going to be. So no matter how fluffy of a brush you use, you're still going to be pushing a lot of that color in there, right? So if you go in towards the end of your brush, it's going to be a softer effect. So if you're somebody, again, who is heavy-handed, right, and you're way up here and you're trying to blend that out, you're going to have so much color going on in here. It's not going to be as blend, or you're going to have to put in more work to make that look really soft and pretty, and then go ahead in with other colors. So the lower you hold your brush, the easier it is for you to blend, because you have a softer application. That's something just kind of keep in mind when you're holding your brushes, because sometimes, you know, you could be doing everything right in the sense of having a fluffy brush and, you know, prepping your eyelids correctly, and then you're like, why is this still so heavy? Why is this color not blending? Sometimes it's honestly just how you're holding your brush. When you're looking at like how to hold your brush, right? Think of it like a pencil versus a pen. When you have a pen, it's so like dense of a color, right? You're getting that full color payoff from a pen. It's very bold. I don't want to say it's harsh, but it's harsh, like your eyes see it immediately. Versus a pencil, it's a lot softer, you know, it glides along a little easier, you know, you just have that like softer diffused effect versus a pen, which is very bold and stationary. So think of when you're holding it up really high and dense, that's like your pen. If you're holding it lower on the brush, that's more like your pencil. So from here, you know, we have our base down. You can see some shadows kind of starting to form on my eye because I haven't put anything up here. So this is really light. I could leave it like this if I wanted to. We're just going to create a little bit more depth and dimension. Now you can absolutely continue to use a brush like this, but typically when I'm working down my eye, and by down I mean lower, I tend to like to use things that progressively get a little smaller. You know, you absolutely can use all one brush for one eye. I typically use maybe 3, depending on the look that I'm doing, just because like each one does something a little different. For my next one, what I'm thinking is I'm going to go ahead in with a little bit of a deeper color here. So I'm going to use this brown. Now, because, I mean, I really like this brown, but I also want it to have a little bit more of a gray tone, because this one here is pretty warm. The reason I want it to have a little bit more of a gray toned is because we're creating shadow, right? So when you think of a shadow, what color is a shadow? It's like black, it's gray, you know, it's deeper in tone. We're going in with warm colors, it's still going to do the same job, but just adding a little bit more of that like depth with the gray or black will help to create more of that shadow effect, and it's less work for you because you don't have to keep building color. So I'm going to go in with a brush that's slightly smaller. I'm going with this guy here. It's a little bit more tapered than the last one I was using. It's still really fluffy, so we're going to get a soft effect. And I went back and forth with these two here just to give me, like I said, a little bit of that gray tone. That warm brown is Mocha Minded, and then the one before that is Pink Sienna, this one here. So I blend those two together, and we're going to go ahead now a little lower than where we placed that color. You're not going directly on top of where you were, but just placing that color a little bit lower. Now on my eye shape, I am now directly underneath my brow bone. If you had already placed your previous color directly under your brow bone, you can just place it, you're still going on top of that color. You know, you don't want to completely go back and forth, but you almost want to shift them. So you have one color here and the next color here. So I'm just a little lower, same thing from the outside in and back and forth in those windshield wiper motions. You can see here, we're really getting some, shape and shadow starting to build on the eye. I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Now, the placement of where you're holding your mirror can often be something that's really difficult for a lot of people. Whether you're doing your makeup in the bathroom, in your bedroom, sitting down, holding a mirror, the best practice when you're doing it, because it's hard to see your eyelids, right? So if you're trying to do something head on, you can't always see where things are being placed, right? Because you're in here and you're trying to hold your brush like way up here so you can still see where you're putting everything on. If you hold your mirror down a little lower, you have your mirror here, you can look into it and your eyes are closed enough that you can still work on it and see what you're doing. So that's a really good tip as well. Like if you're struggling to place, your brush in a certain spot, or you're like, I don't know where to go because I can't see, my eyes aren't open. That's a really good practice just to really keep it easier on yourself, but then also see kind of where your placement is going as well. Alright, so I always like to step back for a second and just kind of see if there's any little areas that, maybe I have one eye that's a little darker than the other, because that happens. I always have one that always looks better than the other. They're never going to be perfect. Like, honestly, nobody's face is truly symmetrical. I have one eye that is a little bit more hooded than the other, so I have to almost trick it, make one side a little deeper than the other. You'll learn that over time. It's really tricky when you're trying to do your own makeup because you're like, why isn't this working? And you want everything to look perfect. Nothing is ever going to look perfect, and I promise you, the more you sit there and examine it, the worse it's going to look. So just sometimes leave it, do something else, come back to it. If it fixes it, great. If not, sometimes you just got to leave it alone, right? Because nobody else is going to notice that when they're looking at you. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, so pretty. But you're going to be like, I know this eye looks terrible. Don't talk about it. Just let it be. Honestly, nobody else is going to notice your mistake either. A lot of the times people will overwork, their eyeshadow, or even just like you overwork your outfit or whatever it may be. You keep thinking about it and you're just like, this doesn't look right. And you keep touching it, keep touching it, keep touching it, and eventually it's just too much. So sometimes you just have to forget about it and go on with your day. And then later on you'll be like, oh, not as bad as I thought. Because when you're so fixated on something, you just kind of keep going. So we can absolutely leave it like this. I just want to add a little bit more dimension. I'm going to go ahead in with this color here. That one, I believe, is Dance in the Dark. Now, this one is very gray toned, and I still want to keep a little bit of that one. So I am just going to put a little bit of hint of that guy in there. I'm probably going to use the same brush here. You could switch to something smaller if you wanted a more dense color payoff and use something kind of like this guy here. Again, personal preference, just for the sake of multifunctional brushes, right? Let's keep using this guy. So with this, I'm going to place this in the outer V of my eye. So this is going down by my lash line and hugging that color that we just placed on there. You can see I'm going back and forth in a sideways V type motion. So you're almost creating like an arrow. You can see there, it's just hugging the outside of my eye. So you could absolutely leave it like this and not put anything on the inner lid area. I'm going to go ahead and put a like a shimmer color afterwards. If you someone who likes more of a matte, then put a matte shadow. You kind of have like open season on whatever you want to put on the inner eye. And again, this works for any colors you're putting on. This is a pretty generic placement of eyeshadow, of just kind of like how to get something on there that you can just really just interchange your colors and textures of shadow that you like to use. Now, when you're looking at textures of shadow as well, like I am somebody who typically likes to use more matte colors in the crease. And a matte color is obviously something that is more flat with no shine. The reason for that is just because it creates more of a shadowed effect than a shimmer, right? So especially too, if you're somebody with a hooded eyelid or you have a more mature skin type, you don't always want to put a shimmer up there because it can enhance those little folds and or wrinkles or whatever it may be. Is something wrong if you like a shimmer up there? Then throw a shimmer up there. Who cares, right? It's makeup. It washes off. It doesn't matter. And it's all in your own creativity and what you like. But just for a certain effect of how you want something to look, I typically like a more matte or satin shadow in the crease area, and then using more of like a shimmer or a sparkle or anything like that on the lid and the brow bone, just to enhance and make that pop. It's kind of a rule of thumb for me. If you're looking to create a shadow or shape, I like to use matte colors. If you're looking to make something pop or enhance something, use more of a shimmer, a glitter, you know, anything with that more sparkly or shiny texture. So kind of from here, again, you could leave this, you can fill in the inner corner, you can throw a little shimmer on your brow bone. I am going to go ahead and put a shimmer on the inner lid, and I'm going to show you how to take this from, you know, day to night. So I'm actually going to take this here. It is the Eyelights from Model & Co. So this is actually a liquid eyeshadow. These are really cool because you can literally take this with your finger and tap it on. You can use it with a brush. It's all personal preference. I'm just going to take a little bit of this here and just buff that on. And I'm going to take a fluffy brush and just kind of blend that out. I'm just going to use this guy. So this, I'm just going to buff out across my eyelid area. Anything that was like really open and just kind of blank that we haven't placed any shadow yet. Just a teeny more. Okay, so unfortunately my camera timed out and I kept like recording and filming. So we have both eyes with the shimmer on top. But basically, you know, you're just filling in both sides. It's okay if you overlap that outer corner just a little bit because it really helps create more of that blend look. If you feel like it's taken away from the depth on the outside, you can always go back in and add a little bit more of that shadow that we'd use on the outside. Now, you could leave it like this, throw a little mascara on and walk out the door, but just for the sake of like turning something, like let's say you went to work or school or whatever like this, and now you're going out to wherever at night to kind of spruce it up, you can either go ahead and deepen the corners, add some eyeliner. There's kind of so many options with this. Just because I'm a big fan of glitter, we're going to use some glitter. I depop all of mine, so mine are in these small little containers. So I have Dubai bronze from NYX, and I have also regular bronze from NYX. One of them is a little bit more of like a gold shimmer, and the other one has a little bit more of like a rusty bronze reflect. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is almost mix the two, just because I want like a little bit of a pop from one and the depth from the other. Now with something like this, I would suggest having something to adhere it to your eye. You can use like a lash adhesive. There's all kinds of glitter glues, whether you use the NYX one, there's Too Faced, there's so many different options. I've used like MAC Fix Plus, which is like your setting spray to put it on there. It's all personal preference. I am going to go ahead in with the NYX glitter glue. You need very, very little with this. And then because I just want like a teeny little reflect, I would prefer a fluffier brush. But because I need it to also pick up in place, I'm going to use a flat brush that's a little fluffy. Sounds silly to think that you can have a dense brush that is fluffier, but you can. So if you go back to when I was talking about flat brushes, right? You can have something like this, which is just very flat. This is going to give you more of like a full opaque, if you want a fully glitter eye, something like this is going to be your better option. This guy here is fluffier, so you're going to have a little bit more of like a dispersed placement than you would have with this. This is going to go on. It's going to be like your one-stop shop. You're going to have glitter all over your eye. This one's going to be a little bit more sporadic because it is a slightly fluffier brush. So I'm going to take a little bit of that glitter glue that I had on there. You can apply this with your finger or with a brush. Because I do want it a little bit more sporadic, I'm just going to use a brush. I also hate how sticky my fingers feel after I use this, so I usually just prefer a brush. I am going to go ahead and put both of that, apply that to both eyes. And then, you can put it over the brown area, like on the outer corner of your eye, but I'm typically only putting this where the shimmer is. So it's really the only area I want to accentuate because we have that shimmer underneath. It is going to make that pop a little bit more and be a good underlying base for the glitter that we're putting on top. So also because I want this a little bit more sporadic, I'm not just dipping directly into the jar. I'm going to use whatever's on the cap. Just because there's a smaller amount on the cap. You saw I just dipped it and I'm sitting here shaking over it just so there's like a teeny little bit on there. And I'm just going to go ahead and gently place that on top of the eye and just kind of press it around in some areas. So now you have like a little twinkle across your eye. And you can go ahead and repeat that on both sides. Now if you only wanted to use one color, then just use one color. I just kind of like a little bit of a pop from both. So I'm going to do just a little bit of this guy and then go ahead on top with the other guy as well. Don't worry about kind of cleaning your brush off in between with the glitters. I mean, at the end of the day, they're all going to intermix anyway. So it's not a big deal if you just use the same brush and it still has a little bit on there. If you're that concerned about it, they sell like what's called a color switch, and it's like almost like a sponge in a jar, and you just kind of run your brush over it. It flicks off all the excess. I will often keep like an old face cloth or a paper towel, because then you can run your brush off in between. If you want to use the same brush but with a different color, you can literally just intermix there. Same idea. I'm just going to pick up what's on the cap, and because this is a darker color, I'm not going to necessarily put like dab this around as much, just because it's going to take over my entire eye look if I do. So just a couple little dots on there, and you're good to go. So you can see how this is just like a teeny bit darker. Like I don't want a whole lot of this Dubai bronze on there, just because it's going to take over the entire look, and then it's just going to look like I put that across my entire eye. But if you look closely, like I have a little bit of both on there, just creates a more multi-dimensional effect. You can absolutely just use one. I'm just glitter obsessed and I love to use more than one. Now with something like this, again, you can just leave it, throw mascara on, walk out the door. I am going to break out this palette one more time, and I'm going to go in with a smaller, more fluffy brush. This is where your detailing brushes are going to come into play. So we have we have the fluffier one and we have the denser one. Remember our conversation of fluffy over dense. Your fluffy one is going to give you a softer effect. Your denser one is going to give you more harsh and intentional placement. So that's good if you really want like a super smoky eye. I did already kind of start doing the underneath of this eye so you can see what we're going to look like. We're going to go ahead back in with the palette that we were using up top, and I'm actually going to, because I want a little bit of a pop, you can either use the same colors you used on top or use like a different color just for like a different accent underneath the eye. I'm going to go ahead and with this mustard color here, and this is going to go right underneath the lash line. Now, if we remember that conversation that we have about like placement of your brush, right? Starting on the outside and working your way in, because where you place your brush matters. Along with that too is if we remember where we talked about like, where to hold your brush. I'm still kind of holding mine in the middle just to get that like kind of guideline of where I want the color to go. But I do want that color to look a little denser and intentional underneath my eye. So I am going to hold it a little higher and go back in underneath the eye and really blend that out. So this is kind of what we got going on. Sometimes I like to add a little bit more, again, dimension on the under eye. You can absolutely leave this the way it is. I might just take a little bit of that yellow again with that little bit of the deeper brown that we used up top, just to add a little bit of dimension and go back underneath the eye, just to make it a little deeper. It's a personal preference. Sometimes just that like little extra touch goes a long way. Because you can see here, even before I touch this one, that one has more of that like deep mustardy effect. This one's just kind of like that yellow mustard. Some people don't even know the difference. It's a personal preference. I just feel like sometimes that little extra step just to add a little depth, could really just step up the eyeshadow look a whole nother level. So we can leave it like this, little mascara. You're good to go. You can add liner on the inside. You can use a nude, a brown, a black. It's all kind of a personal preference. But we're going to kind of keep the rest of that for the next video, and we're going to do a wing liner. So thank you for following along. I hope this was helpful for, a lot of you who have either never worn eyeshadow, who do wear eyeshadow, and just kind of wanted to figure your placement out. If you have any questions about anything that we use in the video or anything about my placement, leave a comment, shoot out to me in a message, anything like that. If you'd like to see a very specific eyeshadow look, or have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to leave us some feedback. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope this makes our quarantine just a little bit easier. Have a good rest of your day.